So welcome, Maria and David. I'll do a brief introduction as a start, and just to get the audience going, we're going to discuss here with Maria and David the question of Nordics and the Baltic region, like are we a deep tech powerhouse, or where and how would we need to gear up in order to become one? So Maria, you're basically the CTO at H2 Green Steel, and you have a background of studying as a physicist. Very impressive background, both in Sweden, but also in the University of Colorado, but then in Harvard, and you've done your PhD also there in the area of metallic materials. And then you did a stint at McKinsey in the consulting side, but then something brought you back to Sweden, and you actually founded H2 Green Steel, and you can tell us a bit about what you guys are doing. But just as a kind of a curiosity, I heard that you used to be also a professional golf player, and you've played like in a really competitive level. Is there any correlation between your studies or scientific research in the area of metals and being a golf professional? Please share us.
Well, the idea of actually studying metals and physics came from when I was out on the golf tour. When I turned professional in the US, then the golf clubs that came to the market started to be prohibited on the golf tour. The reason for that was they had a catapult effect shooting out the ball. So you were hitting so far that either you need to prohibit the golf clubs or you needed to rebuild all the golf courses. So it was much cheaper to prohibit the golf clubs. But I was started to think there when I was playing that why don't you actually use that material in cars? So when you collide in an accident, it starts to buckle out again without you needing to go to the workshop. So that's what I did my PhD on, and then.
Okay, and just a few words about H2 Green Steel. What's your big mission?
We want to decarbonize the steel industry, the global steel industry, period. The global steel industry is 7 to 8% of all the CO2 in the world. And the technology is ready. It just needs to be put together in a certain way, slight modifications. And by putting us into the market, I believe we have already proven, actually, that we can accelerate the industry.
Okay, fantastic. So David, you are a big name in the Nordic deep tech scene. Everyone knows David Sonnek. You're currently the CEO of Navigare Ventures, which is a new, as you said, visionary deep tech investor. And you have more than 20 years in deep tech investing. You've headed Industrifonden, very well established, known investor in the deep tech companies in the Nordics, but also SEB Venture Capital, which was probably more financially driven and very probably interesting experience as well. But then you have background in Ericsson, you've done multiple other things, and you also have a PhD from the Royal Institute of Technology and MBA from the Stockholm School of Economics. So extremely impressive background as an atom physicist. But I learned a very interesting personal detail about you, that you live in a house where you've built your own observatory cupola to the roof. So what's this reason behind there, and what's the story behind being passionate about stars?
Well, the story with having your own observatory is that it's a feeling I have that we are becoming so distant from science today that we use science, but we don't see it. It has become so advanced, it's almost invisible, or as some people say, it's become magic. So I think that citizen science is a movement to try to bring people closer to science. So say, when I bring kids to the observatory, like local scouts we have in our neighborhood, I can show them that it's not all magic. So what I try to do is I try to show how easy it is to, say, measure a cosmic distance, or if they say how hot is a star, or how old is a cluster, or how distant is a nebula. And so I can show that it's not magic. We can measure that. We don't need to trust science. We can do science ourselves. So I'm trying to bridge a bit of that gap between us as citizens and the scientific endeavors that other people do on our behalf, because it's not magic.
Look, I wish my father had done something similar. I think I was encouraged to play piano and paint pictures. So I think, you know, just investigating the stars and the science might have been a great thing to have. Hey, so let's get to the theme of the day. Maybe you could take your chair a bit backwards so we can see each other's.
Absolutely.
And David, you could put your mic a bit closer to your mouth. I think it's a bit far away, so you can twist it from this strap here. Perfect. So let's go through some numbers. Nordic deep tech scene has been growing really rapidly during the last 4 to 5 years. So the whole venture asset class investments were last year roughly 17.5 billion euros. And of that, deep tech investments actually represent 4.5 billion. So it's quite substantial growth. The whole VC asset class has grown roughly 50%, but the deep tech investments even more steeper. But then you start to dig deeper. We start to see that the ecosystem is not yet fully functioning. So one of the things that we see is that all of the deep tech investment growth has actually come from mainly Series B, C, D investments. So these big, massive rounds raised maybe by like Northvolts or Oras or Ice. So in a way, in the phase when the technology risk has been passed, and I'll come to your fundraising briefly, Maria, on H2 Green Steel. But David, that's a kind of there's also a gap in the seed funding. We see that the number of early stage deep tech companies is now growing. There's roughly 13,000 of them. The amount has almost doubled during the last 4 years. So there's big growth in the very early stage and seed, but very little VC money. But how would you describe the state of Nordic deep tech scene as of today, and where are we heading? Any perspectives?
Well, the big difference now is that the landscape is converging, and that investors that usually did not have much contact with each other are now talking and syndicating. So a big difference that we had 10 years ago, maybe a huge divide between tech investors and maybe life science investors. The life science investors were those that took science seriously, but only in very narrow niches of therapeutics, say. And we had the tech investors that, unfortunately, and I was a part of that movement, completely forgot about substance, forgot about basic technology. And we had this huge divide. And now with deep tech, we see a completely new convergence of investment themes where math enters biology and quantum mechanics enters the mechanisms of how medicines work. So that this has brought together a new convergence. And also a lot of the digitization has already been done. So tech investors need to find new stuff. And in this new convergence, many new players have emerged. But still, some of the deep pockets haven't really seen this as an opportunity, meaning that maybe there are enthusiasts in the very early phases that can fund these new crossover companies, but maybe bringing them to scale isn't what the investor mainstream really thinks about yet.
In Finland, the share of deep tech investment from the total VC asset class is roughly 40% as of today. So let's say the VC investors and angels play kind of they collaborate in this area. In Sweden, the proportional share is below 20. What does this tell about the Swedish ecosystem? Are we going to see a major shift during the next 5 years?
We'll see some shift, but people are path dependent, and you look at the past success stories. And unfortunately, the tech success stories are so evident. They are all over the papers. So that the consumer tech, that's what you read about, and that's what you learn from and maybe use as role models. Whereas the deep tech companies are actually hard to describe. They are hard to write an article about. So maybe the deep tech stories like, say, Oatly, that's a deep tech company. It's a science-based company, but that was 20 years ago. So people don't really see that as researchers spinning out research from the university and creating a hugely successful company. It's about sort of a milk subsidy. So that story isn't visible as it should be.
So you mentioned the convergence of technologies. creating completely new domains of investing. And one of these new domains is obviously new materials and new process industry innovations, which is kind of a combination of many things. So Maria, maybe you can give us some perspective. You're obviously trying to disrupt one of the most conservative industries in the world, and you do it by both producing green hydrogen and then green steel. Why this area, and what is your unique approach there, and why a company in Sweden? Is that now the best place in the world to found a deep tech company to disrupt the metal industry?
Yes. So the steel industry has been talking for quite some time about electrifying their processes. And one of the most simple way to actually produce green steel is to use hydrogen. When you do that, you actually use existing technology. It's a DRI tower, and it's fed normally, you say, by natural gas, but natural gas is split into hydrogen and carbon monoxide. So it's already run by hydrogen, and now we're just feeding in more hydrogen into the system. So the technology is ready. And then at the same time, you have customers like the automotive industry in Europe that is craving for this green steel. And then you could ask why, but they have now electrified the whole fleet, and they start to look at the CO2 in their value chain, and they're noticing that most of it actually comes from materials, and most of the materials CO2 emissions are from steel. And they also very afraid of penalties coming into the steel industry, raising the price of steel, and then they pay even more for brown steel. So putting all of that together, there is a huge demand in the market, but the steel industry and the technology is ready, but the steel industry is not moving. So then the question is why? And multiple reasons for that. One is that the European steel industry today is situated in locations where it's really hard to get a continuous flow of green electrons at a low price.
Okay, so they have fixed assets in a tough location.
Yes, very tough locations. So the north of Sweden is optimal in that sense. The other thing is that you need to bring different type of technology, the best of the world's technologies, to one place and not necessarily do the same processes that we have done for 100 years in Europe. And so be able to bringing a new thinking into how we design it. We also getting the cost down of producing this green steel.
So strategically, I think David and I probably as investors immediately start to think like, what is the approach that you've taken? So do you control your own destiny end to end, or are you looking to then collaborate with metal and steel industry players over time? Because one of the challenges what deep tech companies tend to have is time to market. And one of my big questions relating to the locating to Sweden is that Sweden really isn't the biggest market in the world. The biggest markets are in Germany or in USA or in Asia. So how do you control your own destiny, or how dependent you are from the ecosystem?
This was a big question when we started 2.5 years ago. Should we control our own destiny, or should we send half-made steel down to Europe and then they finish it before it goes to end customer? And we decided that we have the customer relationships. Through the founders with Norfolk, we already have wonderful customers down in Europe, and we should foster those relationships and actually produce the whole value chain and create our own destiny and send it down. And the other thing is, when sending steel on water, it's not so expensive. It's expensive to send inland. So it depends on where the customer is situated, where the ports are, and so forth, in order to get economics into it.
This is a fantastic perspective, because I'm sure that the startups in the audience are hearing a lot of these comments from their investors that, big industrial players are so slow, you're very dependent on their ramp up, it's going to take 7 or 15 years, where, come back when you have a customer or something like that. So what would be your advice to these startups?
We have sold 60% of our total capacity at the steel mill that will produce steel 2025, 2026. We have already sold 60% in contracts. So we're bringing the customers in already now. Many of the customers has also invested in us, like BMW, Miele, Electrolux, and so forth. But we're not only thinking that way with the customers, we're also thinking with the technical providers that is providing the machines to us. We're thinking about it with the raw materials. So actually having a foundation of founders across the whole value chain has allowed us to move so quickly.
Well, that requires a big vision and excellent execution. So I think we touched like all of these different building blocks of a deep tech ecosystem, David, here. We spoke about converging technologies and a new kind of a phase of new technologies and investment opportunities. We discussed basically regulation, pushing companies to also become customers or big corporations to start stepping up. What other building blocks a deep tech ecosystem requires? And what do we have here in the Nordics, and what are our biggest gaps, to your opinion?
I think that we have great research.
Research is great. Okay.
And we have companies that are bold enough to look at new technologies. We don't have a perfect tech transfer system. And maybe we don't have the boldness among researchers to really go for the next big thing. So maybe we have all the top-notch research, but we do have a system where researchers are maybe disincentivized to take the step to commercialize, and also sometimes to take the bold vision. Instead, they do research on stuff that's publishable instead of stuff that's interesting. So maybe there is a bit of a disconnect. And maybe if I may, I hope that some in the audience are business coaches and people that work with tech transfer at universities. Please don't tell the companies to remove tech and science from their presentations. And please don't teach them how to make fake predictions of where they're going to be cash flow positive, because we don't care jack shit about that. We care about the wow factor of the science and how it will actually move the world. And then we can make out the Excel sheet stuff with profitability. But we need to be wowed by the depth of the science. And there, I think, is the big challenge we have. We have all the pieces of the puzzle, but people don't come to us with really exciting, bold stuff.
So one of these pieces in the puzzle, what you're now emphasizing, is the talent. We need scientific research, entrepreneurship. So researchers who are bold enough to found companies and go for the big vision. How are we doing otherwise with the talent? So how could we get this other growth talent that we have in other parts of the ecosystem or industry working more towards deep tech companies? Because in a way, if you look like Nordics, we have 28 research institutions and universities. That's like tens of thousands of researchers and basically people who know the technology. But then we also need to get that growth entrepreneurship. So you can bring it through the own ambition level, but also from the ecosystem. So how would you?
But the Nordics have improved so much when it comes to entrepreneurship and early stage funding. It's such a completely different landscape from 10 and 20 years ago. We have very robust systems with a lot of angel money, repeat entrepreneurs. Sometimes what we might be lacking is the power of vision and the understanding with big companies, how fundamentally science changes society. And there is nothing that's invented by chance or invented due to a customer need. Customer needs don't invent anything. So if you start asking customers and thinking that customer needs will invent something, stuff is invented in the lab. Stuff is invented by people being genuinely curious. Stuff is being invented by people questioning established models. So we want founders that come from the lab or with some deep mathematical insight and say, this is why I think that OpenAI or Google or Amazon Web Services are fundamentally wrong. They are using the wrong model. This won't work in 5 or 10 years' time. And I want to be wowed by that. And that's maybe what we are lacking, the connect between the things we do and the thing that boils in the lab. And we know we need to create the sort of the flow of stuff that's being invented with how the future will be changed.
So these kind of big bets we see them in USA and in China, but give us a startup perspective, Maria, here.
No, but I think David is absolutely correct. And if you can actually even connect how it's going to be used, and really feel the power and the mission of that in the science, then it's also going to be easier to recruit the big talent, even in science. When we look at H2GS, it looks nothing like a steel company. We recruit people on the mission of sustainability. For us, that's both the fact that we decarbonize 95% of the CO2, but we also think completely circular. So we actually put together technologies that makes us circulating all the byproducts and putting also partnerships with other industries in order to get the byproducts using. Then digitalization, we're using all the data and actually digitizing the steel industry, and that by itself can be disruptive for the steel industry. And then last, but absolutely not least, we believe that if you're going to have the absolute smartest brains in order to solve the problems, no matter if that is on the shop floor or in the at headquarters, you need to have a very diverse population. So you need both men and women, and you need people from all over the world. And so we already have more than 10 different nationalities in the company. We have 40 women, I believe. And if you look at Europe today on the steel industry, it's 2 to 3% women. So already there, we are disrupting it. And I think it is the core key of why we're able to do that is because today's talent really want to do something meaningful.
Exactly. So you've kind of leaped one big hurdle, which is like raising the first quite big round. Green Steel or H2 Green Steel raised 190 million, and Altor was one of your lead investors, but there were like corporate partners and anything others. Was it difficult to get such a big round together? So now share these insights with other founders here. How do you raise do you just add a zero and plan for 20 million? They're like, shit, let's just put another zero and double the numbers and see whether we can fly. But what was the process like?
I think that people invest in us due to the fact that we are accelerating the green transition in the steel industry. That by itself is very, very exciting. But we're doing that with having hugely talented people. And I think that is actually a big advantage for us. And why people are betting on us. But I also, in those people have made a tremendous journey in the past 2 years. So we got a permit to start building in less than 6 months. That's almost unheard of in Sweden. And so we're already moving dirt on the site. And we have sold out the 60% of the capacity on the steel mill. So it's, I would say it's almost easy to bet on us for those reasons. Now, the big proof will come when we're going to need to raise 4 billion euros in order to actually build the whole thing. Yes, that will be still the big.
So we'll definitely keep our fingers crossed, and I'm sure that this kind of a pace of execution, you will certainly raise that round. But David, can you give us some investor perspective? I'm sure that many of these founders here, they struggle with the fact that very few investors are like visionary like yourself, that you can go with a, bio-based new molecule innovation and talk to David, the science, and he will put the money to the table. But what are the things that you look as a criteria when you invest?
Well, of course, we aren't crazy. We are bold but not crazy. Of course, we look at the size of the opportunity. We look at how many different technology risks are there involved. So we don't want to take too many at a time, because just multiplying those low probabilities will make it very unlikely for the company to succeed. But then, as you say, if we are not visionary, and I agree, we are not typically as investors visionary. So then challenge us and teach us why we should be visionary by the boldness of your vision as a startup.
Excellent point. Let's look towards the future, next 5 to 10 years. How do you envision the future of Nordic deep tech scene?
Well, it's hard in these times when you see, well, most of what you see on TV are burning Russian tanks. So it's difficult to be really bold. But I think that we have, as a deep tech community and a science-driven investment, we have the best is yet to come. Because in my long career, I've never seen such a combination of technologies being ripe to be replaced. There are many technologies that are end of life. There are many technologies that are waiting to replace them. There are so many things that we don't really know how they will. We believe that there will be quantum computers. We are still not sure what will be the dominant design for a quantum computer.
Or the lead applications.
So there are so many, yeah, there are some. We are now combining new fields that now for the first time, at least as I've been observing, mathematics and physics is really entering the life sciences and computational biology. And we can compute both on system level down to how molecules interact with quantum mechanics. So there are such new perspectives open. And also, as a final thing, now you started off with my observatory, you know, that it's so interconnected and science is so pervasive. When we walked here this morning, the blue dot on the map application was a GPS signal received from satellites that were calibrated using quasars, which are distant objects powered by black holes. So me and Alex, we interacted with the black hole this morning when we both walked from the hotel to this venue. So there is so much science that is pervasive in our technology that we need to find and put to use. And so these are fantastic times.
And we shouldn't forget that the best companies are often built on crisis. So even, you know, now or never, we need to solve the energy, food, security, many topics for Europe. So hopefully deep tech companies like H2 Green Steel or any Navigare new investments will help us to get to the next level.
These are fantastic times to start a company.
Exactly. We're out of time. There was a fantastic discussion. Let's give a big hand for Maria and David. Thank you very much.
Thank you.